Our modern Western culture places little to no value on the power of our nightly dreams
to inspire, shift, and reorganize our lives.
This podcast demands a deep reconsideration of
the role our dreams play on our path to a more vital
and meaningful life. The following is living proof
of the life-affirming power of dreams
to affect change
and redirect the trajectory
of our inner and outer lives. These
are the dreams that shape us.
Dreams that shape us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dreams That Shape Us podcast. I'm J.M. DeBoard, your co-host, and I have with me today Chelsea Turpening Coxsey, who has had some amazing experiences in her dreams from a young age. We have had guests on our show who it seemed like something in the dream world chose them to have an expanded experience of dreaming starting from a young age that led them to, we'll just say, an expanded experience of life, to know and understand things that are a little off the beaten path. It can be quite challenging, especially as a child, to feel like you are different than others because you understand things in a way that are different than the way that they understand them. And integrating these experiences into becoming, a fully functioning adult is also quite the challenge. So, Chelsea, first, thank you for being on the podcast with us, and thank you for coming forward to share your story with us. I would like for the listeners to drop in at some point in your story where they can get an idea of who you are and where you're coming from. So wherever that is, if you want to tell us where you were born and what your childhood was like, if you want to start with your first dream, if you want to start with where you are now in your life and count your way back. So just anything that will give our listeners a sense of who you are and where you're coming from, so we can start things off that way.
Okay, thank you. So I suppose I will just start with the current a little bit and also mirroring back into childhood. Right now, I've been through a really large transition in my life, and my dreams have been a very big part of that in the last 3 years. And it's been this long progression of movement towards change, reinventing myself, as well as recreating my life, my career, the relationships around me, the whole 9 yards. But it did start as a child, and through some inner child healing, it mirrors back into my childhood very easily. So I had a very decent and good childhood. I had a family that was pretty normal. We loved each other. There was a lot of conflict still normally back then. And, I grew up religious. So that was a huge thing to transition through, especially with the dreams and spirituality, trying to transition through a lot of that. But I feel like it's this mirror effect that's constantly challenging me to be mindful of where I'm at right now, mindful of the patterns in my life, and to kind of redirect, reinvent the reality that I want to experience, if that makes sense. So it's been a very it's been very, I say it's very beautiful and good. It challenges in the best ways in a very healing in-depthness. And it does mirror back to the childhood and kind of bringing clarity to things that I've been through, but also on a spiritual level and through dreams naturally, that has been the biggest thing constantly in my life. And I think as an adult, I realize that a lot more now because I'm mindful of my dreams and looking back on my childhood and seeing how much of an influence it really had on just me as a person.
Were dreams talked about in your home?
No, they were not.
Did you ever have maybe did you ever catch something from parents or siblings where maybe there was a bias against dreams? Like if you had, say, a parent who had a lot of nightmares, you'll get this impression that dreams are something bad or, at least just undesirable. I'm just curious if you had anything from those early experiences that shaped your perceptions of what dreams are and what they're about.
What shaped my ideas of dreams as a young kid was my own personal experiences. My parents really didn't talk about it a lot. They found it interesting if any of us kids were like, we dream a lot or we watch movies at night. I remember my sister saying that to my mom once, my mom being like, oh, she watches movies at night. How cute is that? And but, growing up Baptist, though, in a really strict, religious environment, dreams hold a certain phase of prophecy a lot in religion and in religious groups, right? So a lot of the times when we hear about dreams, it's those prophetical dreams that ones that create action to get the result that shows up in the books. So you really only hear about the cool ones, like with Mary and Joseph leaving and fleeing, which led to the birth of Christ in Bethlehem. So
they had a warning dream that that Herod was coming for them, and they had to get out of Dodge before. So in the Bible,
and visiting and stuff.
And there's a lot of stories in the Bible, which in religious communities, Christian, religious communities, at least gives dreams some place in the religion. But it tends to be like, well, those were the prophets and the seers of old who had those kinds of dreams. And what you hear in a lot of modern day churches is that age is over with. And if you have dreams that seem to be prophetic or, far seeing or experiences with God, then you might be looked at with a little bit of suspicion.
Exactly. And I've always wondered that. And so my godfather growing up was the pastor of my church. And in the last few years before he had died, I was reaching out to him. I was going through my own awakening phases. And I was going through a lot of dreams at the time, but I remember asking him about and bringing up the dreams. And, and for him, he was very open-minded. And he was like, oh, those are almost prophetic or something unique, like God is using you. But you see, we don't talk about these things from the pulpit or keep it open in the culture of religion or Christianity. So it does seem like it's something that happened back then. It doesn't happen now. And if it happens now, it's the devil or something negative, or it's not important. It doesn't carry on the story of the spiritual presence of what the essence of religion is. So I find it very fascinating that when we approach it from a religious standpoint, it's acceptable when it's in the ancient times. It's a little bit concerning in the modern times. So for me, it was one of those things that I realized I've always been a dreamer. It's just my belief system on being a dreamer has evolved a lot through that. And I've really handled the harness of that space in my life, or that tool that I can use in my adult life more than when I could have when I was a child. No one ever nurtured it within me, encouraged it. I really hardly ever spoke of it. It was something very private and personable to myself.
Well, and some of the experiences you were having early on, while other kids are dreaming of merry-go-rounds and unicorns, you were having, okay, I'm going to jump into the deep end. I want to know when the out-of-body experiences started, or at least some of the lucid dreams. And what the segue I was going to make was that, the dreams that you were having would be the kind that, your average Baptist minister might look at a young kid who's having dreams where they're, having experiences out of their body, things like that, with a lot of suspicion. In fact, I can just imagine some of them being like, yeah, the devil got into that girl. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what these experiences are, and they're not common across the population, at least as far as people talking about it and acknowledging that they have them too. So
it's very fear-based. A lot of people are fear-based with that.
But you learned early on not to have that. You didn't have anything to fear. You sound like that kind of kid. It was like, wow, man, this is really cool. I want more of this. Now that's an impression. It's been a couple weeks since we did our pre-interview. But I just remember walking away with the impression that you had this, it's almost like you were kind of, I don't want to say chosen, that's kind of religious terminology, but that there is something behind the scenes of the dreaming mind that you engage with and that engages with you. And it is an intelligent, aware presence. And it chooses some people to have this expanded experience of dreaming, especially when it comes to them at a young age before you've had, concrete ideas formed about, what is reality? How does dreaming relate to that reality? And so when you have somebody who was chosen, when there's that word again, from a young age, you have to look at it as that there was something behind the scenes that recognized that this was going to be part of your development as a conscious or spiritual being. And I thought maybe so that listeners don't get that it would help them to immerse in it, that maybe you could take one of those early dreams that you had that were really far out and describe it for the listener so they can get a taste of what you were starting to experience from a young age.
Yeah. So now that I look back on it, I will say that I feel it's mindfulness in its own way. Mindful outside of like the conscious aspects, using your imagination and kind of tapping into this creative space outside of the physical, which I think as kids we do that very easily. And, then later in life we kind of develop with like rules and belief systems. What's physical, what's not, we really try to logically control what we perceive as reality, which I really appreciate the logical aspects of who we are as humans. I think we are just trying to be fair to ourselves in its own way. But I think a lot of times it's misunderstood and it's trying to catch up with some of the metaphysical stuff that we're experiencing. But with that being said, I do see how mindfulness has been like a large part of it, because like even though I am mindful now outside of time and space, I can go back and interact with myself in various ways, right? I can go back and interact with my inner child. I can be in the phase I'm in right now and interact with my future self and almost view myself as interdimensional and try to interact as so. I think that takes a very interesting mindful capacity. And I think as a kid, I was very much like that. I was constantly thinking about time and space, interesting concepts. I was often kind of like quiet to myself. I had a small circle of friends that I was comfortable with. I was a very like introverted personality. But I think I was very mindful at those young ages too. So it kind of really helped in the sense that like I was at those ages, like swinging on the swing set, and I was thinking about who I would be someday and what that person was like. And sometimes I would think about situations and experiences I was going through, and I would be like, okay, let's imagine if I was going back in time, how would I like redirect, or what would I do or interact with that space? And I was always using a lot of imagination and, with that. But it really isn't a kind of a brilliant mindset to be in from the beginning when you're thinking of life and experiences that way. So I think that does help. So like, I don't know if it's just like chosen, but I do feel that there is a certain, like there are a good percentage of us out there who I call my dreamers. And I do feel it's a very magical and gifted space. And we're just really tapped into something very beautiful. And there's a lot of us out there. So anyone listening who considers himself a dreamer, continue believing that you're a dreamer and developing in that space. As a child, I started out, so like my very earliest memories with dreams, and now I'm looking back on them, and I was tapping into after our interview, I was really trying to tap into that space more, which I wrote like a whole sheet of a bunch of experiences, and I'm sure right now I don't have that sheet in front of me, so I'll probably only remember a small percentage of that sheet. But I was like, oh my goodness, like I kept remembering. I was like, no, there was a lot. It's just like sometimes it's not always consciously on the surface to be like, oh yeah, like listing it off. But some of my earliest memories with dreams were very like extremely lucid and scary. And it was to the point that it was like kind of confusing reality. So when you would wake up from the dream, you'd be very like confused and lost and be like, okay, where am I now? And you're in a dark room, don't remember where your door is, kind of being lost in your bedroom type of thing. I do remember being very scared by that, but I do feel that that would be something where you're probably very lucid in a dream state as a child, and then coming back to your physical space, and you almost feel lost in it. But I definitely had a lot of dreams as a child where I was like having reoccurrences of hanging out in a tree house where I was playing with Peter Pan. And it was, and that's a common character, right? And it makes a great dream character. Peter Pan can stand for a lot of things. I felt at the time, I felt now as I'm looking back on it, it feels like it's an interaction with a part of myself that was probably more multidimensional or spiritual or magical or something that could exist outside of myself. But I also felt like it represented, at times it felt like maybe my masculine side, but also like a side of myself that was consciously not me, if that makes sense. Like I view when we have like animus dreams or anima dreams, I think that they represent something within us, but it's also mirrored in the external too. So like we're constantly having this weird mirroring effect between the two characters. So I had a lot of dreams like that, but I also had a lot of dreams after I was doing my reflections, that I did have a lot of dreams of my guides. And I believe it did start out in my dream space. But then growing up in a Baptist church, we did speak and talk about how everybody's born with a guardian angel, right? And as a kid, I took that very literally. And, so like I was actually interacting with my guardian angels during the day. I was writing them little notes of appreciation and like kind of talking to them a lot. And so I think that helped develop this space in my dreamland in its own childish, nurturing way. So like, I don't think they necessarily were presenting themselves for who they were, but they were like there in my dream space, creating interesting dreams that made me feel accepted or loved, nurtured in some of those areas, outside of the normal of like the family dynamics. So like I do see how that would like progress. Then later on in the years, I did have experiences like I remember telling you in the interview, there was one that I often talk about, and I've like drawn pictures of it too as an adult, but it was me being on the swing sets during recess in 4th grade and really just swinging off by myself. I wasn't interacting with a lot of kids at that age, so I was often by myself. And just like thinking about my life, thinking about me as a person at like the core of my essence at that age. It's very like philosophical and, like to be thinking like that at such a young age. But to be thinking of who I am and what I wanted in the future. And like, I saw my future self in like a 3D and a 5D form. First, I saw myself in this 3D aspect of like being a boss, or I didn't know what an entrepreneur was at the time. So I saw myself being like this boss and someone who did things on her own terms. And she was just strong and capable and beautiful. And then I also saw myself like literally in the clouds, kind of looking at me like a golden angel. And it was like I was reflecting down on myself. And that I believe would be like my higher self that I was witnessing. And, there are a lot of times in my situations now as an adult where I'm going through stuff and I'm doing inner child healing, and I will often access that very memory, but instead of being the child, I access it as the higher self, trying to communicate with my inner child. So I do feel that when we think of a time outside of time and space, that if I'm consciously thinking of it right now, that I am actively doing it for myself at that time period too. So it's this constant relationship between myself, between past, present, and future. Is the best way to describe it. And dreams have been a very big tool in that.
Dreams give you an opportunity to see yourself from kind of another perspective and to interact with, like, you can dream about a future self, a past self. Like, it's a training ground for you to be able to do this sort of internal work that we are now calling like internal family systems, where you're recognizing that you aren't just a monolithic I, but that you as a conscious being are a we, a plural, and that there are these parts of you that have lives of their own. Kind of like Peter Pan, when you came back into the dream space, did you ever have the sense that Peter had been off doing other things while you were awake going about your day, and then you come back at night and see him, and, like you're rejoining him where he is, but he's been in that space having his own experience of life, existence, while you were gone. So for me, this is kind of the beginning of being able to conceptualize in your own mind how to be able to do this kind of work where like you did, where you imagine yourself in the future and what does that look like, not only from a physical material, this is who I am perspective and this is what's going on and I'm doing in my life, but also from that what you described as a 5D perspective, a larger perspective of something that if you were already kind of communicating with your guides, your spiritual guides, what you called a guardian angel back then, in your dreams, then you were also learning to be able to see yourself from their perspective. So already you're able to handle paradox that for a lot of people is too much to, or at least it makes it when they get into this kind of therapeutic or self-development techniques, it can be difficult for them because they're having to start to get into a paradox of being able to see themselves from multiple perspectives, whereas they're used to only seeing themselves from one perspective. So your dreams are already giving you this foundation for the later work that you're in, the work that you're currently doing. And you do, by the way, you do this with clients and stuff where you teach them how to use their minds and imaginations as tools for creating their reality, and how to see themselves from the perspective of, say, a spirit guide, ancestor, things like that. So where do you want to drop them in with some of your dream life and the dreams that have really shaped you? Where do you want to go next?
I'm going to start. Okay, so I'm 35. I'm going to start in my early 20s. If you give people some idea of where we're at here. And, I really didn't fully grasp this space until I was 30 years old or a little older for 30. So it's been just in the last 5 years, really. So in my early 20s, I was going through a lot of transitions, just with like college, academics, steering my life in a direction, right, that should be holding foundation and stability. And I felt like I was always at this crossroads of what I wanted to do versus what I should be doing to support myself, which, there was always this like inner conflict, I felt like, going on within myself. So in my 20s, shortly after I had I was going to school for opera. I dropped out of university. I stopped singing opera and I just felt like a heavy depression coming on. And I felt like I always kind of struggled with depression, but it just really rang in very clear that I was going through depression. And at the time, I was I was seeking spirituality, but I was very new to it. And at the time, I wouldn't have called it spirituality. I've just been seeking something of truth to the world around us. I was kind of almost angry a little bit, angry towards God, just angry people, society, culture, history. I just what is going on with this fuckery a little bit?
This effed up world, yes.
yeah. And I was mad. And, but so I was kind of playing around with certain experiences that created hallucinogenic experiences at an early age. And the beauty of that is I wouldn't suggest doing that without being mindful. But for me, I jumped into it very young and ignorant, and it created some interesting experiences for me. And I also think it really tapped me back into my dream space very heavily. If I was already dreaming, but it really kind of did something in my mind to really make it more vivid and coming back to life to an extreme. So I had this dream when I was 21 years old where this was definitely felt like out of body, but I always say that something that out of body will mirror back what's going on internally. So I do see it from both perspectives. So the experience in the dream was that I was out of body and I was soaring along and I dropped into a scene that I felt like didn't belong to me. And it was very confusing at why I was even experiencing this. And the dream was that there was like this dark cement room with moisture and stuff in it. And it was dark and gloomy. And there was like almost like a cult like circle with like half of the circle was in red robes with hooded robes. The other half was like in black robes hooded. The red side were these gray aliens that were like really evil energy and just negative. And then the other side were these vulnerable humans or people who were kind of forced there against their will. And they were like, I could hear like some of them crying physically, but I could also hear them crying internally, and I could hear their thoughts. And they were all worried and stressed and like, what's going on here? Why am I here? I'm scared. And I remember looking across from the circle because I dropped into the circle. So I was on the human side. And I looked across from me and I was kind of like scoping out the area. And I remember thinking, I know what's going on here. And as soon as that thought crossed my mind in the dream, one of the like evil aliens looked directly at me. And he didn't say anything, but he would just like, his eyes said it all with like pure hatred and anger. And like, we need to be careful with this one here because she's thinking. And as soon as I thought, like that happened, that interaction, like telepathically in that space, they started pushing humans into the middle of the circle. And in the middle of the circle was like this wormhole that was meant to confuse reality, basically, in a going against free will kind of way. And so they started pushing everyone into the circle. And I remember I jumped out of the scene. I went up through the air and I left the space. And that dream after that had irked me for a very long time, probably for about a decade. And it took me a good amount of time through my journey of dream analysis to really understand that dream. Because at the time I was really trying to, it's just a dream, right? It's not real. But I was also experiencing the seeking aspect in my daytime where I was trying to understand what was going on in the world between good and bad and reality and perceptions of it. And I think that dream represented my seeking, but it also showed me some of the brutality of some of the core aspects of good versus evil, or the duality at its most opposing forms. But I also think it represented something within myself going through my own journey and all of that. But I'm very metaphysical and spiritual, and I do believe through my own personal experiences and even some of my clients that we are experiencing things consciously outside of ourselves too, not just here in the world and the planet we know it, but something that even exists in the spirit realms. So I think that dream held a lot. And for a long time, I wondered what was the point of even experiencing something like that and why. A lot of the times I know people will say, why isn't it a disempowering question? I always find it kind of interesting, especially in those spaces. I'm like, well, why do we experience that? And how do we dissect it? So another example I want to use along with this dream as an example is a couple years later when I was 26 years old. I had a ex-lover who had passed away unexpectedly. And we were always talking about conspiracy theories a little bit, ideas of reality, what's going on this planet, what's going on in a large macro level too, and even spirituality and stuff. And so when he passed away, it really hurt. I didn't get any closure from that. So 2 weeks after he had passed away, I was at a trade show in Las Vegas and I was setting up my booth at the convention center, and I was completely sober. I had just landed that day from my flight, went straight over there to set up booth and work. I wasn't smoking. There was literally nothing in my system, just sober, dry clean. And I always say that just in case people are like, are you sure you weren't a little tipsy or something? Because people always, it's such an insane story that people are like, they want to debunk it a little bit. Trust me, I've wanted to debunk it many times too. I haven't been able to.
Well, it's a trip, and I think our listeners are going to love this. So there you are, you're on the ground in Vegas, you're setting up the booth for a convention that you're working, you're stone sober. And so, tell us what happened next, because this is a trip.
Yeah, so I go outside and I'm, there's a lot of people outside in the back smoking and just kind of socializing after setting up their booths and stuff, getting ready for the next day. And I walk out there, I'm exhausted, I've been sad. I'm not really wanting to interact with people. So I see this man standing off by the side of one of the semis by himself. And he looked just like my boyfriend who had passed away. So I walk up to him and I'm just like in awe, like, oh my gosh, this is weird. And I ask him for a lighter and I light my cigarette and he's just sitting there like literally glowing gold and smiling. And it was most definitely him, like all the energy and stress of whatever he was experiencing on life had like lift off his shoulders and he was just beautiful and happy. And I remember sitting there talking to him and I told him, I was like, you look like someone that was very close with that had passed away 2 weeks ago. And the reason why I walked up to you is because you look so much like him. I couldn't not. And he just sat there smiling. He didn't even say a word to me the whole time. And it was like real as the skin I'm wearing. It wasn't like anything transparent, but I mean, he was glowing, but like he was real skin. And I sat there and I talked to him for a few minutes and then I walked away and then, ended the conversation and walked away. And the rest of the time in Vegas while I was at the trade show, I looked everywhere to see like, was there someone that looked like him? Was I just imagining or being crazy or wishful in my own weird perception of reality? Was he a complete stranger that looked identical to this man? But it was like his energy at his very essence. And it was definitely him. So like, it was one of those things that I was still not on the path I am now. So like at the time I didn't have a belief system to support like seeing someone in that space. And, and I don't go around seeing dead people. At least I don't think I do. Maybe I do. And they just look like normal people on the street, but I don't think I go around seeing people, on the beyond side. So that was the big one that really challenged me. And it ended up being something that I saw as a gift, just to kind of prove that there is something interesting going on in life after death and that the reality we're perceiving has a lot of layers to it.
Did he want to communicate something to you, or was there some kind of exchange between you, whether subconscious or conscious? Like if he shows up there from the other side in a physical form, then there's a reason there's a reason for it other than just to drop in and say hi. At least
I think he was trying to prove it to me. Like in a sense, it felt like a gift of something to expand my belief system. At the time, I really felt like it was a gift or something of a message that like maybe he wasn't allowed to go do that. I wasn't sure, but I was like, but the fact that he came and he was like, if anyone's going to see me in this space, it'll be Chelsea. And he just connected with me there. And later in years after that, especially through my awakening phases, he would often visit my dreams and give me important messages a lot on like healing and balancing and like expanding my belief systems. So like that wasn't the end of my experiences with him. It led from physical to the dream space after that.
Okay. Do you see any connection with the dream with the aliens and the way that they like not necessarily the content of the experience, but it's like that dream had you in a place that in your own mind made you really start to question why the world is the way it is and perhaps ways that it could be different than what the surface appearance or reality of it is. Then you have this boyfriend who this is what you two dig talking about with each other, delving into these, could there be parallel universes? Could we go back in time? Could there be people among us who it's kind of like the Matrix, they're non-player characters who are participating in society. You're in Vegas where there's a lot of stories of people encountering, actually like alien beings, but they're look exactly like humans. There's actually in the alien lore, there's quite a number of these stories from people who swear they were stone sober at the time, or at least not tripping out on psychedelics, where people could be like, oh yeah, you saw an alien. Sure you did,
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing is a sort of a progression where you start off with this way that you're learning to question reality, and then you have an experience. It starts off in your dreams, but then you have an experience of reality, waking, breathing, sun shining, birds singing reality that seemed to bring in an element that, I mean, it would be like a dream in a way.
Yeah.
And you look over and see someone who, like, you died 2 weeks ago. What are you doing here? You know, like,
Yeah.
this shouldn't be happening. But when you have the experience of it happen, then there's not a question anymore of this shouldn't be happening, or a question of whether you're hallucinating or delusional, or something like that. You're dead sober, and you know yourself well enough to know that this was actually the person who came from the other side to come and visit you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, wow. Okay. So where does this take you next?
Okay. So those two dreams, they did
Or the
create
first one was a dream, and the second was a waking life experience.
Both experiences created the same question of, why am I experiencing this? And then it kind of leads on later in my development as a human and just a dreamer in general, and my belief systems. I think I was getting a taste for something outside of my belief systems, and it was challenging it in like a really good way and trying to almost wake me up. So then fasting forward to a couple of years later into my early 30s, I started having a lot of like inner turmoil. I was having dreams where there was a lot of conflict within myself, which now I look back on, it was like my conscious parts of myself and my unconscious parts of themselves really having intense dialogue amongst themselves. And it was showing in my dreams. And, I really wasn't happy in life. I valued more out of myself and the experiences I was going through. I had settled for a lot of things that just weren't authentic for me, and was like going with this weird flow that just was not flowing with me in life. And I think we all experience that to an extent. It's easy to go with the flow and let life direct us versus we directing the flow of life.
Yeah. And how old are you at this point?
35.
So this is recently.
Yeah, like in the last 5 years. And so a lot of these experiences in my dreams led me into my own challenging my belief systems, trying to understand what was going on in my dreams. I started keeping a dream journal, slowly started learning how to do dream analysis on myself. First through like Carl Jung. I think I had mentioned this to you in one of our interviews. One of my guides so I was experiencing my guides in my dreams at this age. I was experiencing my higher self, where I was interacting with her in my dreams, telling her my concerns. She was there like comforting and supporting me. I was experiencing dreams with my masculine side, where he was telling me what was wrong with the masculine influences in my life and how these patterns were deeply rooted, and how I needed to have some resolution and some form of like awakening towards that in my life. I also was having dreams with my inner child. So like, as you were said, the internal family system, I was having a lot of these dreams, like each voice, and it was getting very clear where it was coming from. So like there were a few dreams, like let's say from my masculine side, that got my attention. On a very in-depth level, like a few of them were coming from my ex-boyfriend at the time, who was appearing in my dreams and just trying to show me some of the imbalances in my life and giving me like advice almost on how to move forward. Then I was experiencing just dreams from the masculine side in general, but almost in a reincarnated soul-like way, which really got so much in depthness that probably got my attention the most, where I was like, well, who is this man in my dreams? And like, what is going on here? And just telling me that my eyes will always stay the same. My face will always change, but they will always recognize my eyes. And, like showing a lot of love towards me and kissing me and like this exuberant of beautiful energy. And then, having conversations with my higher self and this comfort, having guides appear in my dreams, always right there on my shoulder, kind of helping me guide through some of my anxiety dreams and stress dreams and how I was feeling in life. So like it was enough to get my attention, but I had no idea like what to perceive of all of that, right? It was there, but I'm like, but what do I make of all of this?
So let's talk about the reincarnation real quick, because I want listeners to understand what you're referring to. The eyes are said to always, in each incarnation, to be the recognizable part of you. I have experienced this. I first had a past life regression spontaneous happen, and when I looked at the eyes of the person who was in that scene with me, I immediately recognized the person who was in my life, who that was. And I had heard this before about from people who are big in the field, like Brian Weiss, who had said, well, this is one of the commonalities that we found after studying it. But when I actually experienced it, I was like, yes, this is very clear to me that there is truth to this. So when you say like you're recognizing them in the dream space, they're saying they're recognizing you, like you're different now. They knew you in another life, and now they're coming to you in your dreams in this life, and they're saying that they know and recognize you in part because you have the same eyes as you had before.
Exactly. Like they actually put their hand over my face and they just looked right at my eyes and they go, but your eyes will always be the same, and they'll recognize me.
So where are they coming from into the dream space? If they are current incarnation, like I don't want to say even incarnations, because that implies that they're in the body, but they could still be on the other side, like as some kind of, so, and this will get into something. There's a theory or a sort of an idea that is carried down through the reincarnation community that some of the people who've been really important in our lives, we call them soulmates, meaning the people who are part of our soul group, and they're very close. We're very closely united with them. It's not just lovers and people like that. It can be siblings and parents and friends and coworkers, and even your worst enemies can be these people who incarnate over and over again with you in these various lives. But there's also a theory that some of them stay on the other side, and they're kind of like ground control, and you're Major Tom, who goes blasting off into this physical incarnation of life, and they stay connected to you from the other side. And one of the ways that they can come and visit you to have a more direct communication, other than just sort of the crazy intuitions and hunches, which actually turn out to be a sort of telepathic communication from the other side. In a dream space, it can be a little more direct. You can actually have a conversation. You can have what is like a lucid, almost material, physical interaction with them. At least that's the way it seems while you're dreaming. So this past person who was very important in your life is coming into your dream space and could be still disincarnate, a spirit on the other side, or the subconscious mind of somebody who's alive in this world now with you. Did you have any sense of that?
I have the same theory through my own experiences of how that felt. That's why I say the anima and the animus is really interesting, because I do feel that even though it's a part of who we are in our own duality, I do think it represents someone who's either physical or spiritual. Maybe they're not alive currently, but they're their own conscious being of some sort. And I've experienced that a lot, and I've kind of come to the same conclusion as what you were explaining.
Well, anima and animus are archetypes, and I don't mean to. I just had to interject real quick because there might be people who aren't understanding the terminology, and so before we keep repeating this word, even though we've used it on the podcast before, anima was from Carl Jung's conceptualization that there is a female subpersonality or sub-person inside of every man. The psyche, you have a conscious side of the psyche that takes on a certain gender, characteristic or characteristics. And then there's an underside or opposite counterpart in the psyche, takes on the aspect of the opposite gender. And the idea over a lifetime of living is that the two of them are going to transcend and become this greater being by combining the masculine and the feminine, which is a concept you see in yin and yang. And there's a lot of different ways that this has been, talked about. Animus, or is the female, is the male, is the man within every woman. And it's the same idea as anima, except for the animus is that man in the underside of the psyche of every female. And now we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but what we're getting into now is we're going deeper into this, because an archetype is something that is a universal form that gives shape to things that are in this material reality, but originates in a reality that is not physical reality, that is not space-time. What physicist David Bohm called the implicate order, which is the place where form is given its blueprint, and then it comes into the world as something that you can see or interact with, or that manifests in the human psyche. Archetypes were the bridges that manifested things like patterns of thought and behavior, principles of the ways that we think and behave, and it goes really deep. But what you're saying is, you think that this person who interacted with you in the dream as an animus character was actually a sort of masculine-oriented spiritual presence?
It felt like something outside of my own consciousness trying to help and support me.
That would be the definition of an archetype in some ways, especially the main archetypes. The self archetype in particular is said to be sort of a spirit guide. Carl Jung just gave it a different terminology and actually tried to scientifically understand it, at least as far as being a psychiatrist who was delving into the physics of this, along with physicist Wolfgang Pauli. So that's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down right now.
I love that rabbit hole though. But that could be another podcast.
Well, you just got us there, because what you're telling us is that you think that in your dreams that there are people from past incarnations who are kind of working through these archetypal channels, the channels in the psyche between yourself as an individual and the larger consciousness system that is this universe, and that they're actually interacting with you in your dream space through that channel. Yeah.
And it was interesting because it had developed as this internal relationship for a long time, and not just like that. It mirrored myself and what I needed in life, but it also felt like something so real outside of myself. Let's see, there was another dream that while you were talking that I remembered, and it was important. I had this dream probably a few months later. So like at this time I was having my guides literally interacting with me face to face, teaching me things and having just a bunch of interactions with all
face to face in your dreams, right?
Yes. And I was also experiencing like my internal family system, and I was studying Richard Schwartz's dynamics of his internal family system, right? So I was familiar with that, and I was already applying it to myself, and at that time. And so I was having dreams of my masculine side, but it felt like this history lesson. So I've always now I really want to write a book someday just specifically on the anima and the animus for the masculine and feminine, and the history and dynamics of it through my own personal experiences. I had dreams very vivid that were explaining like the separation and why there was a separation. It's kind of odd, but like we were going through a lot of intense things that felt emotional, and but it was a physical, not just emotional, something physically outside of ourselves. And we had to, in the dream, we wanted to stay connected to each other. So he said that I need to exist within his subconsciousness so that he would never forget me. And in the dream, I started out at his bottom of his feet, and I entered, and I remember like feeling this dark void and entering all the way upwards into this like bright light, and like basically like bombing into it like a torpedo style, going into this bright light. And then afterwards it was like this big bang, and it felt like at the time in the dream I felt like I was very proud of myself for succeeding at doing that, and that I was just existing within his subconsciousness. And then in the dream, later throughout the dream, I was looking through his eyes, his life through his eyes in the dream. And I felt like it was kind of explaining some form of like, if there was a separation, why would an archetype or something deep like that have to embed itself into the subconsciousness? What would have had that happen? And like, I felt like that dream was trying to explain that to me a little bit.
So in a way, the story between you and this presence that had come into your dream, very strongly masculine, who's explaining this relationship that you've had, is now starting to mirror the larger idea of why we have masculine and feminine in the world to begin with, which is that we needed to separate what began as one energy, and it had to separate and then learn how to interact with itself to then rise to a higher level of creation, because of the way that the dynamics of these two energies interacting with each other then creates a third. And the idea is that when you get that third into play, the possibilities for creation just are so exponentially opened that it's like, and so this is something that's needed by creation itself for it to continue unfolding infinitely in the way that it does.
Yeah, because like I've had dreams later on in years, and like these dreams are like what I call like challenging my belief system and really like opening me up or blossoming into something bigger and helping direct me to open my mind more. I had a dream the night my grandmother died, a couple, like maybe 2 years after that, where maybe not even 2 years, maybe a year after that, where she had died. And that night while I was asleep, I dreamt that I walked to the gates of heaven. I gave her a hug and she held my hand and I walked her through like these golden arches with no walls. And it was just like white energy on the other side. And the dream didn't end with me walking through the gates. Like, I just don't remember I felt like when I walked through the gates, like that was the end of where my consciousness could exist. And then beyond that, it was like subconsciousness. So I do find it interesting that like the consciousness is a little bit limited in its experiences sometimes in those areas.
And in NDEs, people reach a point where they have to come back.
Yeah.
And because if they go beyond that, and it's often shown as a gate or a door or something like that, you go beyond that point and you're permanently in the afterlife, which means that your consciousness, whatever it is that you've known yourself as a conscious being, they describe it as shedding it like an overcoat.
That would make sense. Yeah.
A costume that you put on to live in the physical world as this distinct person. But then when you go to the other side, this is something that you discard and you become pure, awareness again, which means what you are in your subconscious.
That would make sense. I always say like 1 foot in, 1 foot out kind of thing. And I think when we're living in a body skin on those levels, we are kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We're like the 3D and the 5D is a common term. But
so this was the night that your grandmother died.
Yes.
Like the night that she died, you went to the gates of heaven with her, and then you kind of saw her over to the other side, and then you come back.
Yeah.
And again, Edgar Casey says that we do this every night, that we go off in spirit or soul and have journeys and interactions with the other side. And if the other side is the subconscious mind also creates our dreams.
Yeah.
Or at least it's the space where we have a dream experience in our own mind is in the subconscious. So now we can understand that our subconscious is being linked to all.
Subconscious, it's all like an ether cord is how I describe it. Like we have our own individual house or our own individual conscious and subconsciousness that works within us. But then I believe in the mass collective, right? Kind of like how Carl Jung described, like the next layer is the mass collective. And I think people can tap into the mass collective. And I think that's where we see like a lot of mediumship, telepathy, connecting in unusual ways. I think it's when we're able to access those spaces. And some people are better at it than others. But that's how I'm seeing it. It's all part like of our making or our gear If we were a computer, we're all able to access these spaces. Are we working just directly on our desktop, or are we accessing the internet?
Yeah, because it's built into you. It's just your relationship with your own subconscious aspects of yourself. And so what we call mediumship is actually just learning how to tune into some frequency that's in your subconscious and is in everyone's. It's just that some people have the ability to be able to sort of tune into which one of those frequencies is transmitting the information or establishing the line of communication that they want. And this, for you, you're being taught this in your dreams. Like, these are kind of, I don't know if they were new concepts to you at the time, but you're going into your dream space and actually getting direct high level training from what?
So that was my next question of exploration for myself. Is this a negative thing, a positive thing? And I did have like a lot of seeking and self-research on like what is good and what is bad. And at the end of the day, I got my best results or answers from nature itself as like a macro and micro networking system. That like maybe good and bad is just a concept that we make as humans, and it's just like the flow of the universe of how things work. When I understood it that way, it kind of developed differently. I realized that a lot of the negative things that I was experiencing were still developing me and pushing me in a good direction, because I learned how to use my tools and resources and move forward. Like say in this example, I was experiencing out-of-body experiences after a while, especially in like my early 30s. I was noticing them a lot more, and they were like extremely active, and I was like in the lower realms. And I was constantly battling negative things and learning how to not just heal in my physical life, but move upwards with love and a better mindset or vibrational aspect, to be in a better place. So when I started on the negative, learned how to use my aura, certain things with lucid dreaming, skills like that. And then when I got to the higher places, it was a lot of like healing and self-development, being shown my guides, seeing my higher self, seeing some of my friends and their higher selves coming into my dreams and like supporting me or helping me. Still continuing with the masculine side as well, which did develop into like, I feel like my physical life eventually. So I do feel like, going back to the masculine story, I felt like I actually met that person in real life in its own way. That's why I was like, okay, they could be still in the spirit realm or alive, but there's something with like how I always say like the higher self seems to be the multidimensional aspect of who we are, and we each have one. That's like the best way I could describe the higher self. It's like a multidimensional, or your soul almost. And like my dreams continue to develop who I am on like a spiritual and physical level. So like I was having dreams later on where my guides were teaching me 3 points of focus. And they kept repeating it over and over again. And I don't remember it right now, but I know it's subconsciously stored, so it will surface when needed. But they were also, like at one point when I was getting in the dream analysis stuff, like a little earlier, they were suggesting books to me, like Carl Jung, The Man and His Symbolism. That book was suggested to me through dreams. That one. And then it also, my dreams were encouraging me to study microbiology, which now I realize is networking systems on a macro and micro level, which internal family system kind of does the same thing, right? But it was wanting me to study microbiology. It's to the point where like my guides were literally at one point for 3 months, this was like a year and a half ago, they were putting their hands over my eyes while I was sleeping, and they told me that I had to view life through my third eye. And they kept putting their hands over my eyes, and they're like, it's really important that you look through your third eye. And like at one point, it felt like for like a month after that, I was just staring at my ceiling while I was sleeping. And like I felt like I was just staring at my ceiling. And like I wish I had like one of those analog clocks, just so like something around me was actually changing, and it wasn't just a symbolic memory of what I know my ceiling looks like. That happened for a long time. Then I was having dreams where they were like, I have so many dreams that are teaching me stuff. Like we could have a whole thing on just talking about the lessons you get from dreams. I was having past life experiences where I was a Jewish girl in a German school, and it was right when it first started getting raided, and they were like collecting a lot of the Jewish culture. And like I remember running through the school with a couple other small kids and trying to get away. And the only reason why I had that dream because it was representing something that was a pattern that was still happening in my current life. But like, you know, so it's been a lot. So I love shamanism a whole lot, understanding how the soul is. And the soul speaks symbolism just like the subconsciousness. So it's really good to understand symbolism, especially your own, and to learn how to communicate with your subconsciousness. It's taken me on this whole self-discovery and self-development journey, but like overall, it's been a soul journey. I've had a lot of like in my last year and a half, I've had a lot of conversations or dialogue in my dreams where my soul is talking to my ego, and it's showing me how the ego perceives something, but then it'll rewind and show me how the soul views it or senses its reality or perception, and like how we view things very differently. Basically begging me or trying to teach my ego to release its reins, to allow more soul interactions in my daytime, to be more soulful. You know, and I know that sounds vague to people, like, oh, to be more soulful, but like when you're getting these lessons bits by bits, like how to perceive love, how to perceive something as beautiful. As an example, in one of the dreams, it was showing me a man with really large clown feet. And I remember thinking, this is deformity. And then all of a sudden, looked at him, and I felt this strong sense of love and beauty. And I realized that was my soul saw it as beautiful. My ego saw it as deformed, right? And it was like showing me these different dynamics.
It's kind of like when you encounter the homeless person who's actually your guardian angel. You know, a lot of people have had those kinds of stories, and it's if you're judging from surface appearance, then you won't understand what you're actually interacting with. And it's a lesson to always be open and not closed within the ego's point of view, which dreaming itself teaches us. Because if we didn't dream, the ego would never have a counterpoint of view that it could be shown experientially. You know, like in dreams, we're given the opportunity to experience the other point of view, and that's the best way to learn. So and it also opens us up in a way that we're not while we're awake. You know, like our defenses tend to come down while we're dreaming, and our filters are not keeping this information at bay, as it often does when the ego puts up boundaries and barriers against understanding that there's something greater than itself. And Carl Jung talked a lot about dreaming as basically being a sort of marriage counseling between the unconscious and the ego. The goal in the end is what the alchemists referred to as marriage of the soul, which is the uniting of the consciousness of the person with the unconsciousness that it comes from. But it's also the masculine and the feminine, because the conscious and unconscious mind takes form as anima and animus, that they're coming together in a union of, you know, where they act as one, but with the dynamics of these two energies coming together to act as one. And that this is actually what dreaming, Jung said that this is what the lifetime goal of dreaming is. That it's like I said, marriage counseling. It's the unconscious trying to teach the ego what it knows so that it can develop into the marriage partner that the unconscious, or call it the subconscious, needs. If we understand that the subconscious or unconscious is also the entire universe and beyond, then you could look at dreaming as your training ground for you to unite with all of creation
everything.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah,
Wow.
everything.
Wow.
It's beautiful. And I always say, like, I know modern day spirituality, they're always like, oh, you got to like kill the ego. And I'm not going to lie, since I started doing it on myself, but even working with clients, I say the one thing I've noticed is I love working with the ego. I truly believe it is doing and working with the tools it knows and has. And we live in an ecosystem as society. So our egos are just trying to keep up with the mass collective's egos rules, how we identify, how we view belief systems, reality, the whole nine yards. But ultimately, the subconsciousness really is just trying to reconnect with the conscious parts of ourselves. And the ego controls all of that. The ego will sit there and send things off into the unconscious parts of ourselves. What it's ashamed of, what it denies, what it won't accept as part of ourselves. It will put away so that the rest of the system doesn't see it. And that'd be on the micro and macro levels of networking, right? Like we all have our internal family systems within ourselves, but we have it as a society and so on. So when a society or when an individual is ran and managed just by the ecosystem, society tends to also be that way too. So like I would say the ego is just trying to keep up with the system that it created.
Oh, yeah. As collectively, we've created a system. Yeah. The world as we understand it is the world that's created by the ego, or in the sense of all egos come together into this project, which is to create
the rules,
create civilization as we know it, or society as we know it.
Yeah.
And so now you're learning to see beyond. Yeah. So if you change and now what we see is a way of being able to change the world as in society and what we've built as a civilization, that there might be a pathway to changing it or at least kind of redirecting it onto a better path, because we're opening ourselves up as beings, giving up the ego side or allowing the ego to tap into something bigger, which is coming through our dreams and other experiences. But for most people, most of the time, it's coming to them through their dreams, and it's trying to teach them the things that they need to know to operate better in this world. But it's not just for you as an individual. What you do as an individual to evolve this greater consciousness is also going to automatically get shared with the entire system. Because, Chelsea, why is that true? Because there's nothing about yourself that you can hide from the larger system. It sees you, no matter what the ego might try to hide about you, it sees you for what you are. There. And it's actually working with what you consider to be the parts that you don't like, or the thorniest or most difficult to deal with, is also the fodder for the soul. Because Jung in particular talked about this, that he's like, I didn't find soul in the grand temple of the highest places in my mind. I found soul in the deepest, darkest parts of my own psyche. And then, and it's almost like the Beauty and the Beast story. It comes at you looking all beastly, but what it's waiting for you to do is to recognize its true nature, so that it can turn, when Beauty in the story, which is an old mythological tale, when Beauty marries the Beast, what she's recognizing in him the beauty that is in him, and that she finds out all along that the Beast was only a surface appearance. So relating, that it was an illusion in a way, but somebody had to see through the illusion to allow him to become the handsome prince that he was all along underneath it all. So what we're really doing, and where that relates to our conversation, is that the ego learns that even the worst, what it considers to be the worst parts of itself, the least desirable parts, that have been labeled that way by society, right? It's the ego, and the ego is for us to be able to operate in society, and the rules that the ego operates under is also from its adaptation to the world that it finds it's in, which is a social world. So what it's learning, though, is that these parts of itself that it finds least acceptable are also the parts where soul, the deepest parts of the subconscious or whatever, is doing its work, where it's focusing on to become, this is what becomes soul food, this is what feeds the very basis of spiritual creation, which is also material creation. They're just two sides of the same coin. You're actually developing, it's going to develop it in a way that is going to bring that part of you oneself into the world, fully embrace and accept it, it charges it with this sort of creative dynamic energy that then becomes part of this creation process in the world. That's wow. Okay, sorry. This is all coming together as we're talking about it, and so I'm realizing this too. Thank you. This journey into like near-death experiences and stuff that I've, this rabbit hole I've been in. Now all this information is coming together as we talk. So if I'm not making any sense in post-production, I will try to.
No, it makes sense to me, and I'm curious at what you're working on in your own stuff, because I find these topics extremely fascinating. I have to study business and things like that to create business, right? But like, you could know all of this beautiful information, and like, how do you share it? And like, so I'm constantly developing in like, how does consciousness work? And I go a lot off of my own experiences, but I work with a handful of clients who also have a lot of these similar experiences happening. So for me in the coaching seat, it's just like mind-boggling, like, wow, jaw-dropping. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, it's absolutely beautiful. And like, that's why I would say, like, people ask, I wish life came with a manual.
Yeah.
It's called Dreams.
Well, and this is leading us around to something that we started hinting at in our pre-interview before we went on air. Chelsea and I have talked on the phone a little bit to hash out where we're going with this, to tell her story. And one of the things that this was leading towards was that she's learned a way of being able to identify the symbols. And I was going to say the symbolic language, because symbols are ways of communicating, which are coming from the other side, whether it is the subconscious or it's the afterlife, which it's probably both, and they're both the same thing, right? But this symbolic language that dreams speak in, the language of symbols, is also the language of something bigger that you've tapped into and you're discovering. So I think we've taken the listeners to the point where they understand where you're at, that this has been coming to you because this was a path in life that you found yourself on, but also because something came to you through your dreams to teach you these things. It gave you the books to read. It told you the teachers, the people that you could find. It made these connections in this physical material world for you to be able to continue on this path to gain a unique understanding of what these symbols are. They're not just dream symbols. I mean, symbols are they're manifestations of something that's coming to us as sort of ways of communicating ideas that are coming from the source that's not only behind our dreams, but is behind all of creation and material reality too. So what I was hoping is that we could segue to what you understand about this. We've wanted this, and how you use this to work with dreams, because we've wanted this season to start talking more about the mechanics of dream work, and we've approached it from all these different perspectives. But now that people understand your story, I think they might understand that you've developed a way of understanding dreams through these symbols that's unique, and as I think is going to be a great contribution to the dream work community.
I always say that knowing how dreams work, it's great, but if you're not applying it, then what's the point? You have to apply it, and that's something I work with my clients. We'll split half the session of dream analysis and the other half of coaching and creating goals. And that's one thing I've been saying is, when our dreams show us a problem and give us a solution, then we create a goal or a plan to action. So I've used that same formula in my own personal life. I very much listen to my dreams and my subconsciousness, and at this point I say I like co-create with myself in that way. It's emotional processing. I know how to like work and heal, pick up previous patterns. It gets even to like past life stuff and like even more woo-woo almost. I've had dreams where I'm like a being like almost like Wiccan initiated through like picking out a beautiful, I don't even know what to call, like a hooded cape thing that with like intricate details of like wooded animal creatures on it and like beautiful colors of heavy sage and like even seeing like past history of what that would look like. But what I do most with it is I take my subconsciousness and I let it exist in the daytime very openly. So I do have my books and I creatively write, and like I don't sit down and go, okay, this is what I'm going to write about today. Like it comes very organically, and I quickly grab a paper and pen and let it out, and it's my subconscious releases. So I've noticed that like it's a very meditative space that also mirrors and reflects a lot of my dream spaces too. So it's giving my subconsciousness more of a voice. And the way it's developed in my daytime is it's helping me, make choices in love and the relationships in my life, be it family dynamics, romance, like my children and my ex-husband even, and helping me grow and learn through that, to stop telling myself repeated stories that make me a victim, but how do I grow through it, and to be the thriving victor that we all deserve to be. As an example, for the last couple of years, I've been writing about this space that I believed existed out of a time and space. Like it was something that didn't exist. And I would always go there in my writing creatively. And I would go there sometimes in meditation. And I would also experience it in my dreams. First, it started out in my dreams and led into the other phases. And then I realized that when I went to Australia this last year, a couple months ago, I was writing about the guy I'm with right now. I was writing about his land and like the space he is. And when he sent me a picture of it, and I was like, oh my God, I've seen this before, having like this premonition, like the idea that dreams can give you a flavor of what your future looks like. And then from there, you can say, oh, I don't like that, I'm going to redirect in a different direction. Or I like that, I'm going to keep working towards it. I really use that a lot in my dream spaces. The way I view dreams, like symbolism speaks the language, and like pictures. Like if I laid out 5 different pictures or even tarot cards, right, would be a good example. Seeing, I believe tarot came from dreams originally, with their symbolic nature. So like when you lay down like 3 or 4 cards and you see that they have a layout of images which create a message or almost give like a sentence or a paragraph of meaning, that's how I view dreams too. I think at the core of it, it all comes back down to our ego. As we were discussing earlier, it has a lot of limitations. And I think our ego, ultimately, it's not trying to harm us. I think it's trying to do us good. But it is very limited in what it believes is facts or reality, or even how it carries its belief systems. So at the end of the day, there's this famous saying, feed one wolf, right? We all have 2 wolves within us, feed one. I say screw that, feed them both. One is your conscious part of yourself, and one's your unconscious part of yourself, or your subconscious. And when you're feeding them both, it helps them both thrive. Because at the end of the day, I really feel like our ego parts of ourselves just truly want to logically understand the subconsciousness. It can't function the same way as the subconsciousness does because it's the conscious part of ourselves. So it's a very different mechanism a tad bit. But when you know how to support your ego to feed it good information that helps support your intuition or your subconscious aspects of yourself, it's usually very readily willing to explore parts of that or to let it come back to surface and to make room for it in your life. So I think a lot of our belief systems are derived from that part of ourselves, the conscious part of ourselves. And so when we start working on nurturing the ego and giving it the right kind of information to understand those parts of ourselves, then we actually will start seeing results. And then when you understand how that works and how you work with your ego and how you nurture it, and you understand, hey, I'm definitely hitting a wall here. I believe it's a belief system or my mindset even. You don't have to be a belief system. You just see the word mindset. It's my mindset and I want to evolve or pivot or progress my mindset. Then you have to allow the ego to ease into those parts of your subconscious to allow it to pivot and pivot your conscious part of yourself. It is this back and forth rotation between your conscious and your subconscious and allowing them to like merge into something very beautiful, if that makes sense.
I'm picturing, like the ego is learning what the soul already knows, but the soul
Yeah.
needs the ego to know it so it can become the dynamic creative partner that it needs. It wants to have this marriage of the soul or union between the conscious and the unconscious. But so this whole idea of dissolving the ego is absolutely preposterous. Like that's the last thing that you would want to do, because the unconscious, the soul, is already as vast and as powerful as the universe itself. And so for the ego to then dissolve or not develop, it's going to get totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's a child standing, it's an infant next to a fully matured adult. If you think of soul as the
Yeah.
fully matured adult, if you have the ego that doesn't know itself, the ego that is caught in these limiting beliefs, the ego that is bought into the mass delusion that is this civilization that we're in, this creation of the ego that we've now we've created it and we have to operate within it, becomes the very things that limits the ego from understanding itself as this larger thing that it is. It becomes the sort of walls that we build around ourselves. And what we're doing is trying to help the ego to see the larger thing that it really is by teaching it what the soul knows. But it has to be able to stand on its own and operate in this world, which is what Jung said that was dangerous about Westerners taking on the Eastern ways. When they would like go to India, next thing you know, they're, going up onto a mountain and trying to dissolve their ego into, this. He said the Westerners, our path is different. We call it individuation because our path is to become distinct, strong individuals. Whereas the Eastern way, at least at the time, was seen more in a group collective level, where the ego could sort of blend into the society that it was part of, and in that way, the walls dissolve. But in the Western way, we have to have the strong ego and everything that it comes with it, ego barriers, ego walls, because it gives us space to be able to operate in the world. We have to be able to carve out a space within ourselves that we can say is just one's own, so that it's and have that space so that you can then stand as an individual and be able to operate in this world in a way that then advances you so that you can become stronger, more mature, and eventually become the mate that the unconscious has been trying to train all along to become its partner. And it can't do it for you. You kind of, as a fresh being in this world, you start off as you are a child in this world, and you can be an adult and you're still a child in your understanding. But what the unconscious is going to try to do is then feed you the information that you need and teach you the lessons and stuff so that you can become the adult partner that it then unites with in.
Yeah. So when we think about it on like as a planet Earth, and we got our Western and our Eastern, as you were just describing. This, I believe, truly someday they will merge together. Like Western culture loves its logic and its facts and its science, right? I think that's very important. And I think that what we're doing here as a culture on the Western side of the planet is that we are actually expanding in this finally, right? And we're able to kind of support the Eastern or the spirituality or the soul of our planet. So like, I think someday a lot of these things will naturally conclude because it's what's happening internally. It will happen on an external mass collective scale too. I think we're right there as a culture, like a planet, really. If we think about it, like we're already hitting these climaxes where something has to pivot. And like there is enough facts and the Western culture is leaning into it. So like when I look, like, okay, so people always talk about doomsday and all the negative things, or like the rapture, right? We've been hearing about these apocalyptical states. And like my thing is like I truly believe an apocalyptical state is something that happens internally. I do not want to see it happen externally necessarily, but I do believe something's going to happen externally for it to pivot into physical reality. But what happens after the apocalyptical state internally is something truly, absolutely beautiful. And like even in growing up in a Christian religion where we're reading the Bible, like you have new earth or like God or consciousness, something comes internal, or they say it's your soul or God, and it's brings something beautiful into creation. So whatever, I think the more people that are experiencing this dynamic within themselves and then they see the change, and like for me, the apocalyptical dreams were several years ago. It has been an absolute beauty of recreating and restructuring my life and using it as a blank canvas to do whatever I wanted, right?
Yes.
And now I think as a society, we will also be experiencing that. There will be something of a dynamic that flips its switch. The old doesn't work anymore. We have to combine together these Western and Eastern views and bring them together in what would that look like in a physical form. We know what it looks like individually, right? And we know what it looks like internally and physically in our physical life. What would it look like on a mass collective scale though? And what does the future of humanity look like when we make that phase of change? Those are the things I love.
Apocalypse means unveiling. It's like lifting the blinders off the eyes. That's what the word actually means. So when we're talking about an apocalypse, we're talking about a complete new understanding that emerges. When you talk about apocalypse, what you're talking about is an unveiling or revealing, which we could look at as being this deeper level of truth that is known by soul and is known in the subconscious, but it's now having to make its way into this physical material world. So what else, we talked some about journaling and some of these imaginative techniques. Obviously manifestation is going to be part of sort of the curriculum of this. We're doing this a lot through dream work. The dreams are bringing you the material to work on. They're going to point you in the direction by the symbols that are appearing and the different kinds of scenarios and things that play out. They're going to point you to where you need to develop. But how do you do that with people? Because I know that you've been working with symbols, and we started talking about tarot, and the tarot is kind of like a symbolic system, and that you can get the information from the unconscious through the cards. Now, what else are you doing with the people that you work with to facilitate this process of growth?
Well, there's a few techniques we've discussed already, but one thing that I've really been using a lot more in sessions is, I think, so I learned this from Robert Moss, just like reading his books and how he would talk about how he holds like group sessions or workshops and stuff, which I absolutely love, and it made sense and it really like connected a lot of dots of how I could use it. But it's when I'm doing the dream analysis and we're trying to dive deeper and beyond the surface level of symbolism, but like really get deeper. And I already know what's going on in their life, but I want to know what certain things mean or how to progress or create more dialogue between characters or the soul or even something spiritually, consciously outside of ourselves. I will ask the clients to kind of just go in a very slight meditative place, like close their eyes, and I will ask more questions to dive a little deeper, like what does the water mean in this dream? Is it an experience you went through, or is it an emotion you feel? And I ask them to kind of like subconsciously respond. So I try to make it to where you're consciously relaxed, and I only want answers from the subconsciousness. So they say go with the first response that comes to surface. Don't overthink it or analyze it, because we consciously like to do that. And let it dive deeper. And I've seen a lot of like really big results where like they're, like if I have a client interact with their soul, the response back is like, they might be like insecure about the process at first, but they're like, okay, I'll try it. And then like the response back from like their soul or some part of themselves emotionally will give them an answer. And it's such in-depth wisdom and just like such a different, like someone might speak one way. And then when they're repeating what they heard as the internal voice coming from them, it's like this in-depth wisdom. And it makes so much sense. So like ultimately, I believe every dreamer already knows the meaning of their dream. They're just consciously overthinking it or tripping over it, or it's your consciousness. You're not consciously understanding it. So I'm trying to teach them to understand symbolism consciously, but to create this space for themselves to kind of go silent and to seek deep within themselves. What does that mean? Because I could sit here all day and give them really great answers, but is it the right answer? Is it the wrong answer? I'm never going to tell someone they're wrong. Because deep down, if anyone's going to be wrong, it's probably me, really, as the dream coach. Because like I could sit here and give a million examples or ideas based off of how I felt about it, or my experiences with their past dreams and knowing how their brain and emotional connection works. And sometimes it gets really easy, like once you're in that role, you're like, okay, you know that person pretty well and you can figure it out and know their life. But like when we want to take it to the deeper levels, I always say that dreams evolve in meaning. It's never black and white. There's always these spirals of full knowledge that happens. Like your first experience with a dream will just be a circle. And then you go back to it maybe a week or a couple of weeks later, and it has more depth.
You understand things better. You're back at the same point, but viewing it from a different perspective. If you're on the spiral and you've come around 360, you're not on the exact same spot. You're now viewing that spot from a different perspective. And so the spiral is used as a common symbol for that process of psychological growth and soul growth, because it's really how it's unfolding.
I usually tell my clients, I was like, and anyone ever listening, I would say, just put down the dream dictionaries. Because like, I feel like personally that goes off of the Mass Collective, which is great within certain contexts. But when you're looking at yourself emotionally as an individual, like it can, like everyone views symbolism through their own emotional connection to it. So like for me, when I dream of a snake, it's usually, especially within the context, sometimes the context can be negative with the snake, sometimes it can be positive. It's all based on how I feel about it. But like personally, I view snakes from a spiritual level of like wisdom and transformation and shedding of old different things, right? Some people are afraid of snakes and they don't like snakes. I personally don't want to hold a snake in real life, but so I have different relationships with the idea of a snake. Like physically, I don't want to hold a snake. I'm afraid of snakes. Emotionally, I do have a good connection with them in a symbolic way. And like, so it, like everyone's unique. You really have to like dive into how you're emotionally feeling towards it. And like, yeah, it does open this can of worms a little bit. I always say that dreams are a mirror too. And even like the out of body dreams or the spiritual dreams, positive or negative, I feel like they mirror us in the physical and what we're going through experiences too. And as you were saying, the different layers, like how it can speak to the mind, body, and soul. It can also speak to what you're physically going through, what you're emotionally going through, what you're spiritually going.
So what I'm thinking is that you've just given the listeners a lot of information that's fantastic. It's brought forward that there is a level to understanding dreams that is waiting for anyone that wants to know it. That this is a way that you can start engaging with what I like to call the larger consciousness system. They call it the collective unconscious. The larger reality that is this universe is you can interface with it in a very direct, meaningful, personal sort of way. And it begins with your dreams, and then it goes further into ways that you can use your imagination as a creative and communication tool. So I think that there are people who are like, I'm going to drink that Kool-Aid. Oh yeah, this sounds good to me. Where do I sign up? Which would mean they need to come find you. And so that leads me to inviting you to tell our listeners how they can find you.
Yeah. So my website is turpeningcoxsey.com. And I also want to promote my book, which does go hand in hand with my coaching. And it's my own personal subconscious releases and evolution through the relationship between my consciousness and my subconsciousness. And that's a book series, and it's poetical, so it's not like a hefty academic read. It's very nice, light reading to reflect on. And that is Living Life Metaphorically, A Journey to Waking Up. It's available on Amazon right now. And it's a series. So like the first one's out. I'm getting my second one soon. The second one's Living Life Metaphorically, A Journey to Within. The third one is Living Life Metaphorically, A Journey to Other Realms, which is exploring more of connecting externally with other conscious things outside of myself through like astral projecting and meditation and a lot of that stuff, and evolving into like the third eye and the crown chakra. And then the fourth one I'm working on right now is Living Life Metaphorically, A Journey into the Wild, which is learning how to tap into nature and more shamanic approaches. I think dreams are a major tool. I don't know how we have made it this far as Western culture without our dreams helping us. I realize a lot of major impact and exploration scientifically, inventions, a lot of these do come from the inspiration. Even art comes from the inspiration of dreams or the subconsciousness kind of problem solving for us. So like we've made it by like the hair of our skin a little bit, but I think we as a culture and the whole planet and individual person, if we really embrace our dreams and learn how to co-create with our dreams, this would be a very different reality.